Hello and welcome to another episode of The Mark Medley Show. And this evening's, or depending on where you're listening, could be morning or afternoon, but this podcast, the title is, How's That Being Bitter, Mean, and Nasty Working for You? And I titled it that because a few years ago, Sarah Palin threw out the question, and it was, as the kids say now, throwing some shade on President Obama at that time and his supporters when she threw the question out, how's that hopey, changey stuff working for you? So I thought I would take the opposite approach and ask, particularly for those of you who may fall into those categories, because if you don't consider yourself bitter, mean, or nasty, this may or may not be for you. However, I think those of you who are bitter, mean, and nasty, you know you're bitter, mean, and nasty. And if that's the case, then I encourage you to keep listening. Because my challenge to you through this podcast is to help you understand that being bitter, mean, and nasty, believe it or not, and contrary to popular belief, is a choice. You are literally choosing to be or remain bitter, mean, and nasty. Now, don't get me wrong. I get it. I know folks go through things. Life is a roller coaster. It is. Things that you don't expect to happen happens. There's been some things that's happened in my life that in my wildest imagination, if someone had told me it was going to happen, and in some instances people did tell me it was going to happen, and I didn't believe it. I said, no, that'll never happen to me. And it did. Life has its ups and downs. There's death. There's divorce. There's job loss. There's financial struggles. There's bankruptcy. If we look recently, currently at the folks in Houston, Texas, with the hurricane, with the storm. A few years ago, it was Katrina. Some years, it was 9/11. We just never know what's going to happen next in life. So that's why I say everyone has something that happens to them, and we have to choose how we respond. Because something negative happens with you, are you going to be bitter for the rest of your life? If something happened to you in your 40s or your 30s and you happen to be blessed enough to live to 100, are you going to be bitter for 60 years? Are you going to be mean? Are you going to treat people nasty because of something that happened to you? Are you going to project onto other folks your hurt and your pain? Because really that's what you're doing. Interestingly enough, and again it acts as confirmation, because I was thinking about doing this particular podcast earlier today, and just as I do whenever I'm going to write my blog or anything else, I kind of let the thoughts ruminate and marinate and kind of, season, kind of get in there so that whenever I have to talk or write, it flows. That I really don't even have to script it. That I've been thinking about it long enough that it just comes out. And that's the case that's going on here. I'm not reading from any script. I'm speaking from experience. I'm speaking what's been laid on my heart. I'm speaking on the thoughts. I'm speaking on folks that I've interacted with. And as I was just saying, for confirmation, oddly enough, because as I've shared on this podcast and on my radio show, The Reading Circle with Mark Medley, I'm always in between 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 books. And one of the books I happen to be reading at the time is called Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender by David R. Hawkins, MD, PhD. And the chapter that I happen to be reading right before doing this podcast was about bitterness and blaming and going through life miserable. And the author said something along the lines of what I'm saying here in terms of it being a choice. He says, bitterness attracts bitterness, and love attracts love. How's that being bitter, mean, and nasty working for you? What results are you getting from that? Do you have the ability for folks to feel sorry for you or pity you, or to constantly throw pity parties, or to constantly be the victim? There's got to be some benefit to constantly choosing to stay miserable. And I know it seems odd that one might say that if you're in misery, that you're choosing to be in that. But the truth of the matter is, you are. And that's not a judgment. That's not an indictment. That's not name calling. But really think about this, because again, anything that I do, I try to do it from the standpoint of encouraging one to think. Don't necessarily have to agree or disagree, but at least consider it. At least think about what's being said or what was written. You may not agree with it. You may think it's a bunch of hooey. You may think it's a bunch of junk. But on the other hand, you may say, I never looked at it that way. I never thought about it that way. So when I say remaining miserable, remaining bitter, remaining mean, remaining nasty is a choice, give some consideration to that and see if by chance you could change actions or change energy. Because in that book that I was just referencing, Letting Go, the author gives an example of a woman who had a very bad divorce. And the only people she hung around with was other bitter divorced women. And that's all they did on a daily basis, was to commiserate of how miserable they were, how wrong they were done, the divorce, how could it happen to them, so forth and so on. So what the author suggested was, I tell you what, instead of going to physical therapy, and I'm paraphrasing, change the crowd that you're hanging with. Go hang around some people who have also divorced but were able to move on very successfully, move on to a new relationship, move on to being single and happy or what have you. Go hang with them. And then after X amount of weeks, if you still feel the same way, then maybe seeking physical therapy, or therapy rather, would work for you. Maybe. Sure enough, the lady did the experiment. She started hanging with positive people. She started hanging with people who had the same experience that she had, but they were able to move on. They looked at whatever happened. They kept it real. They looked at it. The reality was, it is what it is. It was what it was, but they were able to move on. She started hanging with those people. And as a result of hanging with those people, her whole outlook changed. Now, the only reason I use that example, because that's the example that Dr. Hawkins used in his book, Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender. So for those of you who are divorced or have gone through a divorce, I'm not picking on you. I've been through a divorce myself, so I know the pain of that and how it feels. But I also know what it means to move on, and I also know what it means to get stuck in emotions. So that's why, again, I'm asking the question, how is that working for you? How is being bitter, being mean, and being nasty, and treating people wrong, and ignoring people, and not talking to people? Because you know what? It takes more energy not to speak to somebody than it does just to say hello. Don't believe me? Try it. If you have someone that you not speaking with and you all come across each other, watch how much energy it takes for you to go out of your way not to speak to them, compared with just saying hello and keep walking. Whole lot less energy. It takes a lot of energy, believe it or not, to be bitter. It takes a lot of energy to be mean. It takes a lot of energy to be nasty on a consistent basis. It takes a lot of energy to consistently do people wrong. You know you're doing folks wrong. You know when you're doing folks wrong. And you think you're doing something. And the truth of the matter is, when you don't forgive somebody or when you're doing somebody wrong, the person who really is hurt is you. Because the other person that you're holding the grudge against, that you're not forgiving, 9 times out of 10 times, 1, they don't even know you have the grudge, and 2, they don't care. They're going on about their business while you're sitting somewhere brooding and stewing and plotting and trying to figure out how you could try to hurt them. They're going on about their business while you're wasting and burning up all that energy on those conspiracies and plots. When I see such and such the next time, I'm going to make sure I don't speak to them. I'm going to make sure they see that I don't speak to them. I'm going to make sure they know that I'm not speaking to them. It takes a lot of energy. So how's that being bitter, mean, and nasty working for you? Have you ever questioned yourself to say, I can do better than this? That, wow, this really is tiresome. Wow. You know what? I wonder what it would be like to at least try to be happy. I wonder what it would be like to at least maybe try to smile. I wonder what it'd be like if I were to forgive that person and to talk and move on. I wonder what my life would be like. See, I know whenever you hear folks say the power of positive thinking, that takes a lot of flack. That takes a lot of folks poo-poo that. But the truth of the matter is, a lot comes or emanates or is manifested from our thinking, our outlook and perspective. Again, I'm going to use Harvey as an example. Some folks down there are, for the most part, done because they've now given up. They see everything as a negative. They see everything as woe is me, why me, and they've pretty much given up. Then you have other people down there that lost the same amount as the person that's given up, but they're looking at it from, okay, it is what it is. What do I need to do now? And they move forward. They may not like it. I'm not saying these things that you're going to like it. I'm not going to say that you're going to love it. But this I will say, that if you consistently and constantly choose to be miserable, you're going to stay miserable. One of the quotes that I lifted from that book was, bitterness attracts bitterness. Love attracts love. Negative attracts negative. Positive attracts positive. That doesn't mean you're going to see it overnight, because you also need some patience in this thing. Take one little step at a time and work your way away from the misery toward happiness, because the truth of the matter is, there is no place as happiness. It's a journey. We're constantly moving along a journey. I think on one of the Wayne Dyer books, it's happiness. I forget how it goes. I would have to paraphrase it, but it says something like, happiness is the way. That there really is no such thing as happiness. Happiness is the way. I'd have to look it up, and maybe in another podcast I'll put that in there. But I do encourage those of you that feel like for whatever reason the world is against you, that feel that everybody's against you, that feel like you'll just never get over whatever the pain is that you feel like you're in. I encourage you to make an attempt, to make an effort. Get out there and laugh more. Get out there and smile more. Hang with some people who are going somewhere. You've heard that old adage, I'm sure. Birds of a feather. This is the Mark Medley Show. I thank you so much for listening. I'm really enjoying it now that I'm doing it on a regular and consistent basis. The Mark Medley show can be heard now and is distributed in so many different platforms. I'm getting to the point where I'm forgetting some of them when I try to list them. But it's on iHeart. It's on TuneIn. It's on Apple. It's on Spreaker. It's on Stitcher. It's on, let's see, trying to think of it again. Like I said, the list has gotten so long now. But for the most part, if you Google the Mark Medley Show, all the various platforms that come up. And I do ask that you please follow or subscribe, because the truth of the matter is, it is a numbers game. Not to mention, I think the content is worthy. Again, I thank you for listening, and be on the lookout for the next episode of the Mark Medley Show.